Okay, so it's redemption time. This is video number 3 in our series about cinema, art, and man's existential path. In video number 1, we talked about the first mountain, our life's heroic struggles and goals that are built on a sense of ego. Then we talked in the second video about what it's like to be in the swampland or the personal desert when we look at our first half of our lives and discover that all has been vanity, essentially, and there's no meaning in the lives that we had constructed, and then we are set on this very existential quest to try and discover what meaning actually is and whether we have a shot or not at finding that redemption. And so the final video, we're going to talk about the second mountain, which is, yes, out of the ashes of a meaningless void, you discover what it is within yourself. A place of soul, a place of virtue, a place of going beyond yourself in purpose, the sublime, perhaps. You discover something that fills your life with true meaning and with which you can move forward in a sense of devotion and commitment to a new mountain. A sense of, yeah, this is a legacy that I would be truly aligned in building and bequeathing to people beyond me. I'm now ready to commit fully to the simplicity of living my second mountain. So if you've watched just a fraction of the films that we talked about so far, you'll know this is not an easy thing to get to. If you've lived half your life as well, you might realize also that the quest for meaning is challenging. And so I said at the very beginning of these video series that no real artistic view and showing of second mountain life is ever going to look like a neatly wrapped up bow. Like, no great pieces of art are kind of Disney or Marvel comic art where the hero's journey just comes to a wonderful fruition. Yep, you get crowned, you marry your princess and become king and queen, and the film stops there and everything becomes fine. You found your ultimate meaning in life. No, it's possibly because we have so many films and stories like that in our society that we stop men and women from actually seeing more truthfully what a mature second mountain, full life of meaning actually looks like. So in the first 2 videos, we talked about tragedies. Even today, as we look at second mountain life, there is a huge sense of the bittersweet. Because in order to really understand a life of meaning, we've got to understand that we cannot avoid the inevitable. Death, loss of people and things that we love. And so at the best of times, bittersweetness is often the best we can do. And rather than becoming so heroic that we can solve every painful thing in our lives, I believe that maturity really is about becoming nuanced and having enough consolation and acceptance and love within us and around us so that we can accept and be with the difficult and sometimes devastating circumstances that life brings. It's a marker of maturity in my eyes. So at the beginning of this, I said that no work of art is going to, put first mountain, swampland, second mountain in 3 neat linear stages and be able to call itself a work of art, because that would just be too tidy. But there is one film that does it. And this film I really recommend you to watch if you haven't. It's called Ikiru. It's a 1952 film by the Japanese director Akira Kurosawa. And in Ikiru, you follow the later stages of the life of a bureaucrat in early 1950s Tokyo who is undergoing the most banal civil service office work you could ever imagine with the most banal people, and himself, he has become an embodiment of banality, having done this work with dedication for 30 plus years. So he's just going about his life as you normally would, unquestioning, but living really very much this first mountain sense of, yeah, I'm a good citizen, and I have a trustworthy and dependable job, and I am a good upstanding member of society. And that's pretty much the mountain he's living, the script he's living, until one day he goes to the doctors and they tell him he's got cancer and therefore 6 months to live. So this news hits him quite hard and he ends up not going to the office the next day. And he is kicked in the existential balls, and he has to put together what life actually means for him. And so he doesn't seem to really have the language to be able to articulate this at first. And so one of the first things he actually does is take out his life savings and goes to hang out in the whiskey bars and the jazz clubs of underground Tokyo, where he meets all kinds of unsavory friends and unsavory women, and starts drinking himself. And you start to fear the worst for him, like, wow, you know, he's had this diagnosis, he's taken all the money out of the bank. Interestingly, his children don't want him. They have a vested interest in him keeping their inheritance in the bank and never himself spending any of his life savings and going on his own self-exploration. We talked before about parents, the parental conditioning, wanting to keep you on your first mountain. Interestingly, we have the children wanting to keep their parents on the first mountain because everyone around you feels more stable if you don't go into the abyss. But that's exactly what our hero does in Ikiru. He goes into the abyss and finds himself and finds answers in his own swampland, and he ends up discovering the shimmering light of what it might mean for him to scale a second mountain before he dies and actually find real meaning. And so the film has this incredible sweetness of you seeing a second mountain ascent, which is not trite and seems to embody both redemption and devastation all at the same time, to build this beautiful portrait of one man's legacy and how he's going to be remembered. So one of the most epic films you could ever watch about man's existential journey, and interestingly, of course, as it is with all of us on our own existential paths, is the confrontation with death that made everything come to life. So he was walking blindly on his first mountain, and it was his 6th month to live diagnosis, confronting death, meditating with death, facing his mortality in a very acute way that was the catapult and put him really into a new phase of his life. It moved him straight into the abyss, and even his time in the abyss was shortened and intensified in a way that he still had time to come through onto a sort of second mountain in the latter parts of his life. So wonderful. Yeah, and every time, I mean, we talk about this in the legacy course when I talk to men about really overcoming their own deep questions about meaning and whether they're going to find and truly build a meaningful life in all areas, on all frontiers in their lives. It is the question of death that is the ultimate catalyst. And if you're not contemplating your death and becoming very curious about the dying process already, well, then that's an opportunity for you to go deeper into your life's actual meaning. So the second film I want to talk about here about the second mountain is in many ways a follow-up to La Dolce Vita, which we talked about in the previous video. And it's another Fellini film called 8½. Interestingly, with the same actor, Marcello. This time he's playing Guido. And Guido, again, is in early 1960s Rome, and he's a famous film director. And actually, kind of 98% of this film is him in a sort of swampland, actually. He's got himself in over his head. He's a mercurial creative and leader. All of the producers of the film, all of the actors and actresses, all of the costume department, everyone is waiting on his direction to tell them what to do, because they expect that he's got a clear vision for how to turn the film's budget actually into something good in the end. And then the film 8½, centers in on Guido's internal psychological life, and you see a man who is absolutely the epitome of the emperor's new clothes. Like, he's a walking catastrophe. It's just a matter of time before everyone around him discovers that he doesn't have anything on underneath his cloak. He has no vision, he has no mercurial creative genius that's going to get everyone out of this chaos and this prison, and that there seems to be no vision actually for his movie, only tons of inner saboteur and self-doubt. And so you watch Guido move through his life and his relationship and his extramarital affair and his pleas and his meetings with religious folk and his fantasies in the now and his memories from the past, and you see, wow, it's really going to be a miracle if this man pulls anything out. And I identify so hard with this, the sense of being a man leading a team, other people looking at me for direction, and in my best moments of leadership, the only direction I've been able to give to people working with me is that I look at the moment and I respond to it. It's like I don't always have a pre-formed plan. I don't know how things are going to pan out. There's something about the truth of leadership in the world today where we have a lot of surrender and we have to pull out ingenuity on the fly, and we have to direct other people by feeling into an uncertain moment and giving our best shot. This is a core aspect of leadership. And if you're still leading according to a business model made a few years ago, then you can expect that your leadership is going to have a deadness to it, an irresponsiveness to the moment. So there's something really true about this character in 8½. And so again, it's a protagonist I identify with massively. He is struggling with all areas of his psyche. And the question is, will he or will he not be able to pull off his movie and make light of everything surrounding him? And in the Dolce Vita, of course, you see the story of a man who kind of gets eaten by the swamp of the nihilistic reality in which he's living. In 8½, you get a man who you think, my God, it's only a matter of time before he falls down the drain pipe himself. But actually, he's redeemed by something. And magically, there's a way in which his direction and his creativity and his art life comes together. And so what saves him? What makes 8½, a second mountain movie and not just a swampland movie? Well, one, I see him as committed to his art. He is yearning and striving actually to create his film. He wants to create something. And he says in one moment of the movie, I wanted to create something that everyone related to. I wanted to show something about the human spirit and the human mind that everyone can get something from. So there's a sincerity, a refound sincerity in his aspiration that he's spoken out loud. And I think that in a sense is a prayer that guides him forward. The other thing in 8½, that fundamentally he's surrounded by other people that want this endeavor to come off. And even though he has a lot of enemies and detractors and people would like to see him fail, there are enough people that want to see him succeed, so that ultimately he's creating something for beyond himself. If you're a sole writer and your big project is to have a novel and you're writing it in a first mountain way just for yourself to get it out, you can be stuck in the first mountain landscape of your own ego. But in the case of 8½, the project then goes beyond him, and it's actually for other people and presents that sense of silver lining. So the third film that I would like to recommend you watch if you've never seen it, and for me, this, when I watched this, I was filled with so much wonder. It felt, as I was watching this film, that I was looking on something even greater than the pyramids of Giza, and that if an alien were ever to come to planet Earth and want to know something about the human spirit and what humanity is all about, then I would want to show them Seven Samurai. And here you've got a 1974 film. Again, it's another Kurosawa, a Japanese film about samurai sometime in the 15th or the 16th century. And it's epic in its scope. You've got dozens, hundreds of extras all rampaging around this purpose-built wooden kind of log cabin Japanese village, and these long shots of incredible action. And so what's happening in Seven Samurai is that you've got a village of peasants who are under threat by local barbarians, basically bandits, local bandits. And the bandits want to rape and pillage and possibly kill all of the peasants and just loot them for everything that they're worth. And so the peasants are living in fear. Interestingly, the peasants are not really noble or nice people. There's a lot of corruption within the spirit of the peasants themselves. And do they deserve to be saved? That's one of the moral questions that you contend with in the film. But a samurai or two come into the village and they hear the peasants' plea for salvation. And they also hear that the peasants don't really have a lot of money to pay them with, and the samurai are mercenaries basically. But somehow their own honor code has them buy into the transcendental purpose of putting their warrior training in service to save the downtrodden peasants. And what they discover is that they need 7 samurai in order to have enough samurai to defend the village. And they also figure out that there are 80 of these bandits, and they're armed and they're fairly decent fighters themselves. So the samurai go off in search and build a clan of 7. So you have these 7 men, these 7 samurai, each of them embodies a different aspect, if you will, of masculinity in men. And the 7 samurai go to battle, and their task is to defend the village. And so for me, this is the greatest adventure film of all time. You've got this kind of running clock dynamic where you know that 80 bandits are going to try and storm the village, and the 7 samurai have to pick them off one by one. So are the 7 samurai going to kill all 80 bandits and save the peasants of the village? Or are the 7 samurai going to lose? And if the 7 samurai are going to win by saving the village, how many of the 7 samurai are going to have to ultimately give their lives, right? Do you think 7 samurai are going to kill all 80 bandits without suffering any of their own losses? So the sense of will they succeed, will they not succeed is, I mean, I've never had more visceral buy-in in any movie I ever watch. It's if you're into cricket, it's like watching an epic run chase, like in the final of a one-day cricket match. Are they going to kill all the bandits or not? And so you see bandit by bandit, basically, how all the fight scenes went down, how all the murders, the attack, the defense of the town, and you watch the inner experience of these samurai. And of course, my experience of watching this is the greatest transmission of honor and of courage and of virtue and the moral dilemma of, do we protect these peasants even though they're kind of corrupt actually and they're non-ethical people, or do I stick to my own moral code, which is I declared that I'd be a samurai, that I would give my life to defend people who are unable to defend themselves. And so you see a team of men who decide to stand firm in their own self-decided morality, and do they live or do they die? In fact, it doesn't matter in a way if you live or die. What matters is that you live in impeccable honor. And if you are killed, but you are killed in a way where you lived in impeccable honor, then your legend would be preserved, right? If you stepped out of your honor in the very second before dying and you died a dishonorable death, all of your life then would mean for nothing. So the questioning of what is my legacy? Do I die with honor or not? That might not even be so that my legend may travel across the land and everyone can know what an honorable samurai I was. No, it's much more tied into the samurai's experience of his own death, which is, can I die with brimming with honor, this sublime virtue full and embodied with me, just so that I have that experience of dying full of honor. I can have an honorable death, and it doesn't matter what then happens afterwards. I would have lived, according to my warrior code, a life of perfection. I think this is very much second mountain territory, because it's absolutely sacrificial, and sacrificial of whether other people speak about your name in the years to become. So why do I bring this up? You have the meditations on the theme of honor, and you can think about what honor means and question, I wouldn't have done that. Here are all the ways that I'm not a samurai. But the film, to be on the ride, is such a visceral experience that I believe it transmits into me an experience of honor. And so I want to list here a few movies as well which do a similar thing. High Noon, The Battle of Algiers, Rome Open City. So the last two are war films where you are identifying with a sense with the side of the oppressed, and the oppressed are rebelling, trying to claim their freedom. And so in the act of rebellion, revolution, overcoming an occupying force, you are naturally going beyond yourself and willing to sacrifice your individual life so that your people may be freed. Here you have transcendental sense of purpose and meaning built in. So you're deeply on the second mountain territory already. And in High Noon, you've got this wonderful story actually of a very moral policeman. And as he's about to retire from his post, the bandits come and everyone tells him, just let the crime rate happen, let the bandits take control of the city, let crime happen, we're on a downward spiral anyway. You would be a fool to try and govern with old world morality. And so the policeman, you know, so close to retiring and going off into the sunset with his beautiful woman, and he's married Grace Kelly, he decides, no, I'm going to stay here and fight the bandits even though it might kill me. Because I want to leave behind the moral cause that I've given my life to create. You know, I'm a policeman and a guardian of this town for 30 or 40 years. I try and bestow upon this town this wonderful paternal sense of moral care, protection, standards, civility. And when I go, okay, I had a good life and I'll just leave the town to shit for the next people and let the bandits take over. No, I will actively sacrifice myself and my happy retirement to take a stand actually for these old world values. And you see him in High Noon shooting out with the bandits, and he again puts his life on the line for what he cares most about. And so a lot of people say, and you've probably heard this, there are no good films these days, right? What happened to the classics? If we run through these films I've just talked about, we've got 1954, 1952, 1963, High Noon, 1952, Battle of Algiers, 1960 something, and Rome Open City and some of the war films. This is like 1945, this film was made. No one makes cinema like they used to. Why not? Well, one answer to that is because we have not faced kind of society or nationwide or civilization-wide existential threats in their fullness yet. And so we're living kind of autonomously. There's no way that people really are sacrificing their lives for deep, virtuous stances. Well, I think there are many actually in the world, but film is not being made about them. Instead, we're having a return to myth and superheroes or very individual niche kind of love stories and slice of life films. There's some good films being made, but we don't often tap back into that second mountain sense of self-sacrifice. And so the reason why I think we had so many great films in the 1950s is because that generation of filmmakers and actors and everyone involved in the production of the film had lived through the Second World War, and everyone had trifled with these existential questions. There's no way that could not bleed into the film production of the succeeding years. Then in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, the intensity of that died out. But it brings me back to wonder, well, are we going to have another wave of true classic, sublime infused, second mountain showing, virtue embodying art that's not trite or cliche, that pertains to the world in which we live now, that re-inspires the next generation of men rather to live our unique and individual little stories, aspire to something great and sublime and transcendental? Is that going to come? That's one of my personally big philosophical questions of this age. Will I manage to embody that in some of the literature and the art that I create? Will I manage to embody that in some of the coaching and the leadership work that I do? And so that's a question that underpins my own legacy over the next 30 or 40 years. Will I stand strong to my sense of virtue? Will I sacrifice my morals for an easy life? Will I allow myself to be killed, let's say, in front of the forces of cancellation, the 80 bandits, or the people who want to cancel anyone who goes against the standards of the day? Am I going to stand strong in what I believe in and take that on? And that's a question I extend to you. What about your legacy? Have you glimpsed what it means to have a second mountain? Who are your people? What do you love? What would you give your life to defend? If you found out you had 6 months to live, sure, go and live a couple of those months in hedonism. But what would you want to make sure that you bequeathed to the next generations before you would go? And so I'm asking the deepest part of you, actually, asking your own sense of soul. Can you feel a glimmer? Can you feel something of an answer of what that may be? And certainly in a lot of the great masculine traditions, the meditating monks of Tibet, of the samurai, the question of dying a noble death, dying an honourable death, actually the ecstasy at the point of dying, which is, I lived in complete alignment with my ethical choices, seems to be a blissful way to go. And so the second half of life, I believe, on one aspect is, are we going to be able to die with that sense of upright glory, conviction, and connection to what we loved most? And then the other question is, are we going to find delight in the path to get there? Yeah, you might have another 40 years, 50 years ahead of you in which to build your sense of legacy and to hone your own embodied virtues. And so are you going to enjoy that? Or are you going to sacrifice all sense of pleasure and connection in your life so that you may build the monolith, the first mountain monolith skyscraper that you leave behind so that everyone knows what a great man you were? Or are you going to live close to everything that you love and value most dearly and enjoy and revel and truly soak in to your living life as you're living it, so that your days become days of wholeness, belonging, and celebration? What do you think? Where do you stand? So if this whole path of exploring what is meaningful to you, what is of ultimate significance, how you want to be living your life in terms of your spiritual connection to yourself, your relationships, your intimate partnerships, your sense of community and those you love in the world, and also your work, your sense of vision and what you want to be doing with your days. If this is a core concern to you and you would like to receive mentoring, guidance, and be part of a community of really wonderful men sincerely asking and answering the questions of the swamp and the second mountain in their lives, then come and check out Legacy. I have a 2-year community and guided odyssey for you to embark upon that's going to illuminate some of the bigger, more driving questions of your life. Because of course, I believe a life of ultimate suffering is a life where we're stuck on the first mountain, not examining why we're doing what we're doing, not examining the fabric and the substance of our relationships and how we go about trying to get love, not examining who you are in terms of your spirit, your soul, your higher potentials and your virtues. I believe that is a life of reactivity and suffering. And so seeing through that, which you probably have if you've been with me this far, probably you're at least seeing and feeling into the swamp, into the kind of desert and the wasteland of nihilism, wondering what is your part to play in all of this, in a culture that feels like it's decaying around us, in a world where there is a lack of beauty and belonging for so many, where I believe many of us are running out of places where we can go to feel at home and inspired, and where more and more of life seems to be digitized, commodified. There are many, many men and women amongst us who yearn for a more beautiful reality. And so I want to get to know the leaders of today and tomorrow who want to embody and create more beautiful things, art, more beautiful businesses, more beautiful communities in the world. And I want to know you if a devotion to a more beautiful path, a more beautiful course of action is central to who you are. So if you've liked these explorations and you fancy knowing what it would look like to work with me and join a community of people also on this path, check out the legacy page below. We're actually enrolling now for our 2-year initiatory odyssey. I hope to see you there.